Hey, this is Winter with the Shift Spotlight, and today we're here with Lindsey Epperly, and she is the CEO of Jetset World Travel and can be found at jetsetworldtravel.com. So, welcome to the show, Lindsey.
Thanks, Winter. I'm excited to be here.
All right, so we've already got some, huge similarities right off the bat, and we're going to get into those today. But starting out first, why don't you tell us something about you that people may not know, or an interesting fact?
Interesting fact about me, Winter. I'm glad you asked. I actually failed the only business class I ever took. And yet here I am running a business.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. I think it was like Tony Robbins never finished high school. And
Yeah,
some of the smartest people I know and richest people I know for that matter never had any formal training. So
totally.
I wouldn't feel too bad. I
I
think you're
mean, who
doing,
needs macroeconomics, right?
I know, so boring, snooze fest. Um, okay, so why don't you tell our listeners just at a high level what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I own Jetset World Travel, which is a modern travel agency. So we have taken probably what people have in the back of their head, this idea of a travel agency where they walk in and they transact and they get a brochure. It's so different these days. It's now very relationship driven. We manage to send people across the globe to 4 and 5 star destinations, and we have a team of 80 across the US that does so.
So then, like, my mother-in-law would be a classic candidate for you, right? Where she's like, so I planned our honeymoon from beginning to end because I like all of the, ooh, we're gonna do this. I like to get weeded and that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
she was mind blown that I planned our own trip and was like, how do you do that? Because she literally hires somebody to go plan her trip for her where she just shows up. So she's like your avatar, right?
Completely. Well, actually, you both are because we also serve travel advisors. So the individuals who are doing the planning are clients of ours, just as the end traveler is a client of ours. So,
Okay.
people use someone to plan their finances and to plan, anything these days. This is a service, a professional service that is used.
So, what is the best or most interesting trip you've ever planned?
Oh, the most interesting trip. That's a really good question. And I should note, I actually sit as the CEO, so I'm not actively planning trips these days. I haven't been for about 5 years since I've been focused on scaling the company. But so I imagine some of my team members have even more interesting ones than this. But when I did serve as a frontline advisor, I did an around the world private jet trip. That was pretty fascinating. So it was part of Abercrombie and Kent. They are a tour company across the globe that put together a private jet that had, I think, about 20 or so people on it. And my clients were two of those, and they got to circumnavigate the globe in absolute style.
That is amazing. So, like, what got you motivated to start this business? Are you a big traveler yourself?
Yeah, I grew up cruising. My parents actually, funny enough, owned a cruise travel agency for a very brief period of time. They sold it when I was probably 8. So I wouldn't even say that was a huge influence. I just grew up cruising. That was how I thought people traveled. I wandered into a local travel agency for a brochure when I was 19 years old, and I accidentally walked out with a job. So that was how I got into the industry. It was when I was in
Wow.
college saying yes to everything. But being, those times, being 19, looking around the room, seeing very few other people that looked like me that were interested in the idea of growing a new type of business in the industry, I started realizing the opportunities that I had to breathe a fresh life into it. So that was when I really became interested in starting my own agency.
So, how long have you been doing this?
So I am going on 15 years now.
Okay. All right. Long time. So, you work
Yeah.
with your business partner, which is your husband, and so he's
Yes.
your partner in business in life. So, what have you learned being married to your business partner, and how does that all work?
I would love to ask you the same question after I answer this, right? Because it sounds like that's something we have in common.
Yeah, for
Um, right. So my husband and I, it's funny, he left his job in finance when we got married 6 years ago. So we got married and started working together in the same week. We decided while we are young and dumb and we don't know any better, we are going to make this work because we had the ultimate goal of freedom and flexibility, which was what we wanted to craft our lives around this company. What we learned as we were navigating a world pandemic while running a travel agency and expecting our first child, and everything was, this is where the risk comes in. All eggs in one
right.
basket don't look that great at that point. We learned a lot about
Absolutely.
professional, yeah,
Total panic.
It was definitely that, but for 18 months, right? How long can you panic for? Panic became the normal. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
We're
honestly,
drinking.
yeah, honestly, um, that taught us so much about professional respect and how, and I'm sure you and Ken probably have this, right? Like you fall in love with one another, you have this personal respect level. What does it actually mean to show one another professional respect and to appreciate that work Lindsey is a very different person than home Lindsey, and how does
Right.
she show up and how do we interact? And that was a big learning lesson for us, but it's one that I'd say we successfully navigated.
It's interesting. I love that saying, like professional respect, because you're right. I mean, Ken and I were married as well, and we got engaged. Well, actually, we started the business before we got engaged.
Yeah.
And then we worked the business all during our engagement, and then we got married in September. And so we were doing business, move,
Mm.
engagement, wedding, modern family merging,
Yeah.
all of that at the same time. And we work very differently, right? So, like, I had been the head of my own business for a really long time. He had been the head of his business, and get two heads together. But I think that it always worked out as long as you are showing that professional respect. And I think it takes a certain couple who can
Yeah.
do that, because not everybody, like I was telling you offline, my mom and her husband, they don't work well together. They've done it for about 20 years, but it's not pretty, and
Yeah.
somehow they'll pull it off, but it's not pretty. I think we at least try to make it look pretty.
Yeah.
But some of it is actually very, very easy. So,
Yeah. It allows you
um,
to craft a fun life together, I feel like, when you get
yeah.
it right. But it's definitely, you're right. It's not easy from the outside looking in. If it ever looks easy, don't take that for granted.
And I think it also aligns, like, if you have the same vision, it keeps you in
Hmm.
alignment. Whereas if you're each running your own companies or doing different things, then it's like there's two different visions. And that's okay, and it's totally fine. But if you want the freedom or the lifestyle or the money, whatever it is your goal is, as those owners, um, owning a business together or doing it together, it does get you on the same page, and you get to, like, we say it all the time, we get to dream together as
Yeah.
opposed to just like dreaming. I used to do vision boards, like, for myself, and now I do them for, like, our life together. So
Yes.
it's an added layer, I think, that's fun.
Yeah. It's very meaningful.
So you said you're working on scaling your company in the past 5 years. Like, what does that exactly mean? Everybody's definition of growing and scaling, it's all very different.
Yeah, yeah, great question. Well, it was really important to me. I was a practitioner of the business, right? I was a travel advisor for 10 years. And so to scale myself out of that to be able to move into a CEO role was very important. So that was kind of step one.
Right.
Step two to this was to actually turn the company from me to we. And what we mean by that is we were previously called Epperly Travel. That's my maiden name. It was all about me as the salesperson. But we wound up in the middle of the pandemic acquiring another company called Jetset World Travel.
Mm.
The acquisition was an incredible opportunity. The company was larger than us. We were able to really come together in a beautiful way, but with two separate brands, which didn't make any sense. And so we ultimately decided, let's build a platform for our team members and that our clients can really enjoy. And that's when we went from me to we with the transition to Jetset. And then last year we landed on the Inc. 5000 list. So that was a huge accomplishment to go
Huge.
from like 3 years prior being in total shambles to
Yeah.
landing on that list was a good feeling that we were moving in the right direction.
That's awesome. So you said you had 80, like, what did you call them?
Yeah, team members. So that's the
Team
mix
members.
of independent contractors as well as employees.
Okay. So how many employees do you have specifically at the company?
We have 13.
13. And then how many of those are the leaders and kind of overseeing some of the employees?
Yes, that's a great question. So, including myself and Jeremy, we've got 6.
Okay, so what strategies are you using to help build effective teams? Because you said you went from the me to we, and that is a very hard
Mm,
transition to make. That requires you to let go of the reins, to let go of control, and then to empower others to kind of step up into those roles. So you can, Ken and I always say, visionize.
yeah.
Like, he's the visionary for us, right? And so I'm like, he'll come up with an idea. I'm like, oh, you're over there visionizing right now. So you can't do that when you're weeded in the day to day.
Yeah.
You can't do that when you are the example that you're trying to teach your CEOs not to be. So how did you make that initial transition, and how are you, implementing that throughout your leadership team?
Yeah, I love this question because I feel like we're right in the thick of it, right? Like we have been building out this program. We've had tremendous growth over the past 3 years alone. And so we've really had to build this leadership team over that course of time.
Right.
And we've definitely done it wrong as much as we've done it right, right?
Yep.
And two things that we've learned recently that I think are really working well. One is the idea of ownership over everyone's lanes. And that doesn't look like just purely what are you doing, but it looks like ownership over the company and our vision. And so we're coming together. So we recently had something, we call it our base camp, where we bring that leadership team in, we're meeting together, and we crafted our vision statement for the company together. The
Mm.
years passed, Jeremy, or I, specifically me, I am the visionizer, right? What did you just call it?
Visionizer. Yep.
Visionizer.
I love it.
I feel it. I feel that in my soul. I am the visionizer. We would just cast the vision, and here's where they go forward, right? And so this is different now because it's the coming together and saying, this is what we take pride in, and this is where we want to see things going. And so it's giving honor to everyone's vision collectively. And I
Right.
have felt that I've seen a difference in the team members just by doing that.
Yeah.
So that level of empowerment's really been big.
That's cool. So, I mean, when you're running a company and when you're in a CEO position, you screw up a lot. Like that's just par for the course, right? And you learn a lot. And I call it failing fast. Ken and I have
Mhm.
failed really fast on certain things, and then we've had to make shifts in the shift spot in our direction. And
Yeah.
so like we could talk about those all day, but what's something that you did really well or you did right, and you might not have even known at the time that it was something you did right, but you're proud of looking back?
Yeah. I think about the dozens of lessons that we learned as we ran this company in a pandemic. And I know everyone had their experiences of how that impacted their business, but the travel and tourism industry was desperately impacted by this.
Yeah.
And the decision to keep our doors open, keep our lights on, keep our people employed, and knowing that we would come out stronger on the other side. Through that decision, we set a couple of courses. One is we set the tone of over communication. My husband actually came up with the phrase silence breeds insecurity.
Mm,
And so we realized we would not be silent during that time. We were constantly communicating with our team. We were creating programming. I mean, some days it just made absolute no sense for everyone to show up because what are we doing today other
right.
than canceling trips? But it was
Right.
necessary for that part of
Other
the
than
culture.
canceling
Yeah,
trips. Delete.
it was
Oh, and that one, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and delete that one.
it
And
was very sad.
okay.
Very sad times, the canceling of dreams, not recommended. But the second thing is we set a mission during that time to be a beacon. And so our whole thing was getting our team to march toward a unified mission, like a mini mission, right? Like this was not our full-blown mission statement. This was just looking at our industry and at our world and saying, it is a really dark time. How can we show up as a light? And that
Right.
really seemed to just empower and motivate the team during otherwise, would have been and was a very difficult time.
Yeah. During that time, I actually started promoting because my business had gone to a standstill. Nobody was buying real estate at the time at all whatsoever. So I was like, look, there's nothing I can do about that right now. So I started doing, like, I guess in essence, it was my first podcast.
Yeah.
But I was promoting people's businesses that were open. So like my functional medicine doctor, like great business to promote. A girlfriend that had a like workout company that she was doing like workout in the park 6 feet distance or whatever.
Yeah.
So I just started promoting everyone else because it was like, what can you do, right? You can't drink
Yeah.
all day and look at the squirrels. um
Squirrels.
it seems so long ago,
Yeah.
that time, but it really wasn't that long ago.
No. Okay, but also very interesting that you say that Ken is your visionizer and like here you are creating things during that time, like that you've got to fill some sort of this role as well.
Little bit. Like
Yeah.
I definitely am the marketer, and
Hmm.
I can see like ways to market things. He's like high level
Yeah.
visionizing, like
Got it.
he creates things, and it like takes me like a solid day and a half to like digest that and be like, oh, okay, I got it. Whereas he can just see it right away.
Okay,
So
got it.
we do have very different skill sets. And it's funny
Yeah.
because we like work where it's like he handles one thing and he won't even tell me he's doing it. And I handle another thing. And we don't even have to talk about it. Like we know that
Yeah.
that's going to be a my thing and that's going to be his thing. And it just gets done. So we are
Yeah.
definitely fortunate in that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have some tips for our listeners on how to scale their service-based businesses. Let's talk about those because I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, other than getting out of your own way, that's a huge thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, I often relate back to a time where a business mentor of mine said, the tighter you cling, the slower you'll grow. And I found, especially in a service-based business where maybe you're going from solopreneur to entrepreneur, right? Like I did, where you are the main practitioner, you're doing everything, but you are really great at that sales job and that service job. And so it's gonna be really hard to replace you. It's so hard to envision replacing yourself.
Mm.
And so then you wind up becoming the bottleneck to so much. And so that's that whole, the tighter you cling, the slower you'll grow. What I found in my experience of honestly, this business being leveled for us was the ability to relinquish that control is actually what propelled our growth. I mean, we went into the pandemic and have now over quadrupled what we were doing before that even happened, right? So that level of growth that then led us on the Inc. 5000 list, that led us to this acquisition that we were able to complete, all of that occurred because we were able to our grips and let this thing flourish versus continuing to be the bottleneck. So that's probably my number one tip is those times where you feel the tension and you feel like, well, why a business is getting backed up because everyone's asking my permission for this one thing. Well, maybe you don't need to be the person that is
Right.
giving the permission.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
they should
That
empower
is a
themselves.
hard lesson that so many end up learning along the way. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how many coaches or programs are out there telling you, until you
Yeah.
get to that, it's like the make it or break it point. It's like you got to like
Mhm.
bottom out, almost like a heroin addict. You've got to hit the bottom before you can actually
Yeah.
let yourself, grow to that
Yes.
level because otherwise it just you are the problem and you
Yeah.
are the solution. And you can have a bunch of people telling you that, but until you internally, make that shift,
Yeah,
you just
and you
can't.
probably will never fully learn it, right? Like it probably it's just going to keep rearing its head in different ways each time you hit a new obstacle, or in business each time you hit a new plateau, right? Like whatever X number of dollars that happens to happen, then now you're in a re-up moment where you have to decide, sounds like I'm going to have to break this whole thing and build it back again because it can't continue to work at the way that I've currently got it, right? And so that's
Right.
another moment of letting go of control and trusting that you're building something that you believe in and that others believe in too.
Right. So then like what's the plan for jet set world travel? Just making sure I got it right.
Yes.
What's like your goals in the next 5 years? Where are you headed? Where are you visionizing to now?
Yeah, where I am visionizing right now. The goal that we set for ourselves this past year, we all came together, it's an 80-person remote team. And so it's fun. We get to bring everyone together once a year, is to amplify the company and the industry in general. And so there's the whole reason I'm on this podcast right now. It's the reason that I started a podcast called Who Made You the Boss, which is related to Jetset, about professional development, not specifically about travel, because we want to be able to cast outward the culture that we've created at Jetset and to share the story of the travel industry, right? Like most people hear travel advisor, like we were talking about at the beginning of this call, and they have a specific idea, but it looks so different these days, especially on
Right.
the other side of a pandemic. So, why people should use this professional service, why this industry is here to stay and it's flourishing. I think it's part of our job to steward that growth and that vision outward. So our goal right now is simply amplification.
So where do you see yourself investing for resources for growth for the next year?
Yeah, so we actually built a good bit ahead of growth. And so that leadership team that we've talked about is very much poised to be able to handle thoughtful growth within our team. And that's where we're at right now, is this idea that we can grow additional advisors and serve additional advisors well, who then serve the end client well, in a way that I think that we could, in the next 5 years, double what we're doing. We might have to add a few hands on deck after that point or around that point. But to really be able to serve everyone thoughtfully, we are hyper focused on who we bring in to our program. So we don't just accept everyone. We make sure we're interviewing every single advisor who has any sort of level of interest, and we do a lot of intense training with them. So that's really where we're investing those resources, is the advisors on our team, making sure they always find value, they're always served well. And if we're growing, it's via thoughtful growth.
Yeah, I mean the reason why companies break or make it's process and people. And I think so often business owners learn on the job. they have an idea, they create a company, and here they are. Next thing you know, they're involved in the day to day. Their hair is on fire. They're running around like a chicken with their head cut off. And they're learning so much on the job. And a lot of these fundamentals, there isn't like a fundamental how to own a business school. There's a lot of
Right.
marketing schools, there's a lot of business and, CEO coaching groups out there, but it still doesn't have like the fundamentals. So a lot of those things you have to learn along the way. And the fact that you've got a handle on process and people as your two insights, it sets you up for quicker growth.
I certainly hope. I think it also requires a certain element of self-assessment very regularly, right? To determine, I feel this area might be kind of bending under the pressure. How do we reinforce it? And so even like this year, for example, Jeremy and I both kind of looked at ourselves in the mirror and realized if we want our people to be the absolute best, then we also have to be the absolute best, right? So we invested in coaching for ourselves as leaders
Mhm.
because we had for so long been mingling the idea of leadership and management. And those are two very different things.
Very.
So how do you better become a leader to pour more into your leaders? And then also, what does this
Great.
management piece look like? But
That's
it's
right.
just that constant, but I love that stuff, like the assessment and
Yeah.
self-growth. I'm
Yeah.
obsessed.
I never read anything that's not nonfiction. I mean, like, everything's always just some sort of self-help, level up,
Yeah.
upskill, something, like
Any
even on
favorite
vacation.
reads? Do you have like
Oh
a
my
good one recently?
gosh. So many. So have you ever read Start With Why?
Oh yeah, Simon
I
Sinek
love
for
that
sure.
one. I'm
Yes.
rereading The Go-Giver right now. That's
And that
such
one.
a great one. It's just about coming from a place of giving in your business and
Mhm.
never being the taker kind of deal.
Yeah.
I actually got the third Tony Robbins trilogy in his, what is it like? It's like Powerhouse Investing or something. So he
Yeah.
did like this three um part finance book series,
Mhm.
and I do like what he brings to the table sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. So yeah, I've got a couple going.
All at
And
once.
actually, that was my next question.
Yeah.
Was what is one book or resource that you would recommend to another CEO?
Yeah. It's funny. I'm just thinking of this because I'm midway through the book and I'm very bad about recommending books before I've even finished them because I'm usually so on fire as I'm reading them.
It's
But
like
I
it's like recommending a movie where you don't know the ending.
You have no idea. Look, I
And
think
and
this
and
is going to be
and they
good.
recommend it, and you're like, "Bro," like, literally, my brother recommended a movie, and I saw the ending, and I was like, "Bro, why'd you recommend that movie?" And he's like, "Well, I hadn't seen the end yet." It's like,
Yes,
"Well, then don't
hilarious. So
recommend it."
that's where I'm at, but I trust this author. I love everything else he's done, and I feel like it's timely for the conversation you and I have had today. All of this buildup. It's Mike Michalowicz, if you're familiar with any of his
Okay.
stuff. He wrote Profit First and Clockwork, which I loved, but he's got a new book out called All In, and it's all about building a great team. And the whole argument is essentially that there are not simply A players out there, it's that anyone has the potential to be an A player with the right leadership. So it's teaching entrepreneurs how to be the right leaders. I think it's a phenomenal book so far, and I'm confident it will end well as well.
That's funny. Yeah, and that's, what we do at the Shift Spot is we help. So, originally, when we were talking about all the fundamentals of, like,
Mhm.
business owners, and we originally started out the company explaining the fundamentals, finance, sales,
Mm.
and marketing, all the things the CEO just typically doesn't have a handle on, and they kind of go hands off and things get awry and the company starts to get shaky. So we're like, okay, well, if the CEO understands and knows all of these things, then they're going to have a better business. And it was really about getting the CEO the freedom that they
Mm.
wanted in the first place when starting it.
Yeah.
But what we quickly realized is that the CEO is often too busy to learn the fundamentals. And even if they did, they don't know how to implement it in their company.
Mhm.
And so we decided that like the easiest way to do that now is by upskilling and elevating their leadership team. So what we do is we help their leaders and managers without any time commitment on their part on like the top 6 steps that they need to grow as a leader. And one of the things we
Wow.
say here is just, that leaders aren't born, they're trained. And I think it's like 10% of the population are natural born leaders. And like for the rest of us, it does require training, and it
Yeah.
does require like constant looking at yourself in a mirror in a really raw and vulnerable way, because like there are things I can say like I genuinely suck at,
Yeah.
but it takes you to be able to look at yourself and be like, that's just not my skill set, and I need to be okay with that, or I need to work on that. And I think that really ingrained, we all want to be good leaders and we all want to help other people. Like, and that's where that go-giver mentality of that book comes from too. It's just, if you're leading and you're coming from a place of like giving and are not always trying to close a sale. I come from a sales background. I was raised on the floor of a car lot. My dad would sell ice to an Eskimo. I heard it my whole life growing up. And so I, knew no other way until I started applying these, different types of techniques, which are like, hey, it's not about the sale. It's about
Yeah.
like taking care of people. And
Yeah.
that's really when, and being vulnerable, that's really when the business started making, huge strides.
That's amazing. Yeah. And when that team sees you making those choices too, that you are also invested in your self development. This is not simply let me help everyone else. This is also a goal to grow as the leader or the CEO. I think that speaks volumes.
Right, right. And people also, too, your leaders and managers, your employees, they want to know you're investing in them too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anymore, this new work world, right? It's like, what's in it for me? It used to be like,
Yeah.
all right, I pay you a salary, you're going to do what I say. But now,
Yeah.
that's
Now it's
not the
about
case
fulfillment.
anymore.
Yeah.
It's like you have like many partners. All
Hmm.
your employees, all of your staff, they're like mini partners.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
They're stakeholders in your business. It's a very good way to put that.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so you said we'll wrap up with a few more questions. You said, the future of your industry is really bright, it's really big. Like, how are you preparing for that?
Yeah. So one of the things about the travel industry is that for years and years and years, there was a lack of new talent coming into it because people did not understand that it was even a career path. And they certainly didn't understand it was a lucrative career path. And so there was a dearth of time for new talent. We created a mentorship program so that we could identify individuals from outside of the industry that would do well in it, and so that we could rear them up in the right way, because there's no real clear-cut path to becoming a travel advisor. So that is what we are doing to prepare constantly. Jetset sets itself apart in that we do accept new to industry and we train them. And that is not something that can be said of every single other travel agency. Sometimes they are just simply like, congratulations, you have a pulse, you are now a travel agent. And you don't want that person planning your trip, right? You're
Right,
trusting them with some precious time and resources. So we
right.
really try to train our advisors well.
So it's kind of what happened with you when you were 19. You went in and they said, you know what? We're gonna teach you how to do this because we like you.
Completely. And then people trusted me to plan their trip. And luckily it all turned out mostly okay.
Mostly okay. There's only one or two suitcases lost along the way.
Exactly. And I can't control that. That's the airline.
That's funny. All right. So if you had to do it all over again, speaking to a younger self, which you're pretty young already, but a younger, a less experienced self, what advice would you give yourself?
I think that I've always loved the advice that's very hard to listen to, the what would you do if you know you wouldn't fail? And I think that I would actually go back and make myself believe that, right? To just, hey, it's all going to be okay. There is no one right way. No matter what way you do this, you are going to land on your feet. And so to have the permission to try out even more, I'm a decent risk taker, but I look back and think, were there times that I held myself back because I was afraid I would fail, or even the lessons that I learned in running this business through a crisis, right? That we might not okay, and actually better than okay. And so just have the faith that as long as you're putting in the hard work and you are doing the right thing and right by others, you're going to turn out okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if somebody wanted to take the next steps with you, what would they do?
Yes. So if they're interested in working with Jetset and having us plan your trip, that is such an honor. We would love that. Please visit our website at jetsetworldtravel.com. There is a form on there called the Request a Trip form, and that gets us all about the idea that you're dreaming up in the back of your head, and we turn it into a reality. If you love just talking self-help and professional development, that is my jam. I'm the host of a podcast called Who Made You the Boss? And you can connect with me on Instagram, kind of follow along on that journey as I talk about both Who Made You the Boss and what we do at Jetset pretty regularly. And my handle on Instagram is Lindsey Epperly.
Awesome. All right. Well, it was such a pleasure having you today. Thanks for being
Me
on the show.
too. Thank you, Winter.